The wind howled through the mountains of northern Montana like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of the harshest winter the region had seen in decades. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of his property, his calloused hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the cabin he'd spent the last 8 months building. The structure was unlike anything his neighbors had constructed. Walls nearly twice as thick as standard, reinforced with layers of insulation and timber that seemed excessive to everyone who passed by. Down the dirt road, Gerald Hutchins leaned against his brand-new pickup truck, a smirk playing across his weathered face. Beside him stood 3 other men from the community, all of them watching Marcus with barely concealed amusement. "You still working on that fortress of yours, Webb?" Gerald called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "What are you preparing for? A nuclear winter?" The other men laughed, their breath forming clouds in the October air. Marcus turned slowly, his expression neutral. He was a man of few words, tall and lean with the kind of quiet strength that came from years of physical labor. At 42, he'd left behind a failed marriage and a corporate job in Seattle to build something with his own hands in the wilderness. "Just building it right," Marcus replied simply, turning back to his work. "Building it paranoid, you mean?" Another neighbor chimed in. Tom Reeves, a local contractor who'd offered his services months ago, only to be politely declined. "My cabin went up in 6 weeks. You've been at this since March. Those walls must be, what, 10 inches thick?" 12, Marcus said without turning around. The laughter grew louder. Gerald pushed off from his truck and walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I've been building in Montana for 25 years, son. Standard 6-inch walls have kept folks warm through every winter I can remember. You're wasting time, money, and materials. That cabin's going to be darker than a cave with walls that thick. Less window space, harder to heat, slower to build. What's the point?" Marcus finally turned to face them fully, his gray eyes steady. "The point is that it'll stand when it needs to." Gerald shook his head, sharing knowing looks with the other men. "That's city thinking right there. You tech guys come out here thinking you know better than folks who've lived this life for generations. Your cabin's overbuilt, overpriced, and overthought. Come spring, you'll realize you could have saved yourself half the work." The men dispersed, still chuckling among themselves as they headed back to their own properties scattered along the mountain road. Marcus watched them go, then returned to his work. He didn't build the thick walls out of paranoia or ignorance. He'd researched extensively, consulted with Arctic construction experts, studied engineering reports on extreme weather resilience. The old-timers in Montana knew their craft, but Marcus had seen the climate data. The winters were getting more severe, more unpredictable. What worked for 25 years might not work for the next 25. As November approached, the community's mockery became a regular occurrence. At the local hardware store in Whitefish, the small town 15 miles down the mountain, conversations would pause when Marcus entered. He'd hear whispers, see the sideways glances. The man building the bunker, the prepper from Seattle, the guy who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Even Sarah Drummond, who ran the town's only diner, had asked him about it one morning over coffee. "Marcus, honey, people are talking. They think you're expecting the end of the world or something. Is everything okay?" He'd smiled at her genuine concern. "Everything's fine, Sarah. Just building a home that'll last." But the isolation was starting to weigh on him. Marcus had moved to Montana hoping to find community, to escape the superficiality of urban life. Instead, he'd become the subject of ridicule. His closest neighbor, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chun, was the only person who hadn't mocked his choices. She'd simply nodded approvingly when she'd seen his progress, mentioning that her late husband, an engineer, would have appreciated his thoroughness. By late November, most of the cabins in the area were complete. Gerald stood proud with its wide windows and standard construction, completed in record time. Tom's was similar, with a beautiful wraparound porch that everyone admired. Marcus's cabin, by contrast, looked almost industrial, compact, heavily insulated, with smaller windows and walls that seemed to swallow the light. The first snow came early that year, on November 28th. Light flurries that dusted the mountains in white and sent temperatures plunging. Marcus worked by lamplight to finish his interior walls, installing the final layer of insulation. Outside, he could hear the wind beginning to pick up, rattling through the pine trees with increasing force. He didn't know it yet, but the National Weather Service had just issued an alert. A polar vortex was descending from the Arctic, bringing with it temperatures that would shatter records. The harshest winter in Montana's recorded history was about to begin, and it would prove who had built wisely and who had built foolishly. The polar vortex hit Montana on December 3rd with a fury that took even the meteorologists by surprise. Temperatures plummeted to 35 degrees below zero, with wind chills reaching -60. The kind of cold that turned exposed skin black with frostbite in minutes, that made breath freeze in lungs, that killed without mercy. Marcus woke that first morning to an eerie silence. The world outside his thick walls was muffled, distant. He checked his thermometer. The inside of his cabin held steady at 68 degrees, his efficient wood stove radiating warmth that the insulated walls trapped and held. Outside, his weather station read -37. He pulled on layers of thermal clothing and stepped outside to check his generator and wood supply. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his gear. Ice had formed intricate patterns on every surface, and the morning sun seemed powerless against the Arctic air. Down the road, things were already going wrong. Gerald's cabin, built to standard specifications, was struggling. The thin walls provided minimal barrier against the unprecedented cold. His heating system ran constantly, draining his fuel reserves at an alarming rate. Frost began creeping along the interior walls near the windows, forming delicate crystals that would have been beautiful if they weren't so ominous. By day 3, the first crack appeared in Tom's cabin, a sharp splitting sound in the night as the wood contracted in the extreme cold. Then another. The thin walls, designed for normal Montana winters, simply weren't engineered for this level of sustained freezing. Marcus heard about it at the hardware store, where he'd driven his four-wheel drive truck through treacherous roads to pick up extra supplies. The owner, Bill Patterson, looked exhausted and worried. "Tom's cabin is coming apart," Bill said quietly. "Gerald's burning through propane like it's going out of style, and his pipes nearly froze last night despite everything he's doing. We've got 3 families that evacuated to town already. Their cabins just can't keep the heat in." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Anyone need help?" Bill looked at him with something that might have been respect, or might have been resentment. "Funny you should offer. Gerald was just in here an hour ago. Said he'd rather freeze than ask you for anything. Pride's a hell of a thing." Over the next week, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The cold didn't break. It intensified. Weather reports showed the polar vortex stalled over the northern Rockies, with no relief in sight. Marcus's cabin remained warm and secure, his thick walls performing exactly as he designed them to. But outside his bubble of safety, his neighbors were suffering. Dorothy Chun appeared at his door on day 9, wrapped in every blanket she owned, her lips tinged with blue. "Marcus," she said through chattering teeth, "my heater can't keep up anymore. The cold is coming through the walls. I didn't want to bother you, but..." She didn't need to finish. Marcus grabbed his coat. Marcus didn't hesitate. He bundled Dorothy into his truck, grabbed her essential medications and a few personal items, and brought her back to his cabin. Within an hour, she was sitting by his wood stove with hot tea in her hands, color returning to her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I really thought this might be it." "You're safe now," Marcus assured her. "Stay as long as you need." But Dorothy's situation was just the beginning. That same afternoon, Marcus drove back out into the brutal cold. He went to Tom's cabin first, where he found the contractor and his wife huddled in their bedroom, the only room they could still keep marginally warm. Cracks spiderwebbed across the exterior walls, and frost coated the inside of their windows half an inch thick. Tom looked up as Marcus entered, his earlier mockery replaced by hollow-eyed desperation. "The cabin's failing," he said simply. "We've got maybe 2 more days before we have to abandon it." "Come to my place," Marcus offered. "Both of you. I have room." Tom's wife, Linda, started crying with relief, but Tom's jaw tightened. I can't. After everything I said about your cabin, about you wasting your time." Marcus cut him off. This isn't about pride, Tom. It's about survival. Pack what you need. I'll wait. Within 2 hours, Tom and Linda were settled in Marcus's guest room. The cabin that had seemed so dark and cave-like to critics now felt like a sanctuary. The thick walls that had been mocked as excessive were now the only thing standing between families and the killing cold outside. If you're watching this story and thinking about the times when doing something right mattered more than doing it fast, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will show you why preparation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. By nightfall, word had spread. Marcus's cabin was warm. Marcus's cabin was safe. Marcus's cabin was standing strong while others were failing. His phone started ringing. A young couple with a newborn. Their heating system had died completely. A single mother with 2 kids. Frost forming on her interior walls. An elderly veteran whose propane had run out and couldn't get a delivery through the storm. Marcus said yes to every call. By midnight, his cabin held 11 people. Every bed, every couch, every spare blanket was in use. The large open living area he'd designed, another feature that had seemed wasteful, now served as a communal space where families could stay warm together. His oversized wood stove, built to heat the thick-walled structure efficiently, had capacity to spare for the extra bodies. The only person who hadn't called was Gerald Hutchins. Marcus stood at his window, looking out at the frozen landscape. He could see smoke rising from Gerald's chimney in the distance, thin and desperate against the night sky. He thought about the man's pride, his mockery, his absolute refusal to admit he might have been wrong. Then Marcus grabbed his coat and headed out into the darkness. The walk to Gerald's cabin took 15 minutes through knee-deep snow and wind that felt like knives. Marcus's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating a landscape transformed into something alien and hostile. When he reached Gerald's property, he could see the problem immediately. One entire wall of the cabin had a massive crack running from foundation to roofline. Through his thermal imaging camera, Marcus could see heat pouring out of that fissure like blood from a wound. Inside, Gerald would be fighting a losing battle. Marcus knocked hard on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Gerald, it's Marcus Webb. Open up." The door cracked open. Gerald stood there, and Marcus barely recognized him. The proud, mocking man from 2 months ago had been replaced by someone gaunt and exhausted. His cabin's interior was maybe 40 degrees, and Gerald wore every piece of clothing he owned. "Come to gloat?" Gerald asked, his voice hoarse. "Come to help," Marcus replied. "Your wall's compromised. You can't stay here." For a long moment, Gerald just stared at him. Then something broke in the older man's face. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About your cabin. About you. About everything. I was so damn wrong." Marcus stepped inside, assessing the damage. The crack was worse than he'd thought. The entire structure was at risk. "We need to leave now. Grab what you need." Gerald didn't move. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you help me after the way I treated you? I made you a joke in this community. I laughed at you in front of everyone." Marcus met his eyes. "Because that's not who I am. And maybe it's not who you really are either." Something shifted in Gerald's expression. Shame, gratitude, and relief mixed together. He nodded slowly and began gathering his belongings. Back at Marcus's cabin, the addition of Gerald created a strange dynamic. Tom and the others knew the history. They'd witnessed or participated in the mockery. Now here they all were, alive because of the man they'd ridiculed. That night, as 11 people sat around Marcus's living room sharing a simple dinner of soup and bread, Gerald stood up. His hands shook slightly as he addressed the room. "I need to say something," he began. His voice cracked. "I've been building in Montana for 25 years. I thought that meant I knew everything. But Marcus here, he did something I didn't. He didn't just build for the winters we've had. He built for the winter we might have. And because of that, we're all alive and warm tonight." He turned to Marcus. "I'm sorry. For the mockery, for the disrespect, for trying to make you an outsider. You're more of a neighbor than I ever was." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology with quiet grace. "We all did what we thought was right. I just got lucky with my timing." "But it wasn't luck. Dorothy spoke up from her chair by the fire. It was wisdom. There's a difference. The polar vortex lasted 17 days. 17 days of record-breaking cold that rewrote Montana's history books. 17 days during which Marcus's cabin became more than just a shelter. It became a community. The families inside established routines. Tom, using his contractor skills, helped Marcus maintain the wood stove and manage the heating system. Linda organized meal schedules with the limited supplies they had. Gerald, humbled but determined to contribute, taught the younger men how to properly stack wood and maintain the generator. Dorothy entertained the children with stories, keeping their spirits up when cabin fever threatened. Marcus coordinated supply runs with Bill Patterson at the hardware store, who helped arrange emergency deliveries to the cabin. The local community, hearing about what Marcus was doing, began dropping off food, blankets, and fuel. The man they'd mocked had become their hero, and they responded with generosity. On day 12, a news crew from Missoula made it up the mountain. They'd heard about the cabin that was sheltering 11 people through the worst cold snap in state history. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Tran, interviewed Marcus on his porch. "Mr. Webb, people are calling your cabin a miracle of engineering. Did you know this polar vortex was coming?" Marcus shook his head. "No one knew it would be this bad. But I knew climate patterns were changing. I knew we needed to prepare for extremes. So I built accordingly. Your neighbors initially mocked your thick walls. How does that feel now?" Marcus glanced back at the cabin, where he could see Gerald and Tom working together through the window. "It feels like we all learned something important. They learned that different doesn't mean wrong. And I learned that community matters more than being right." The interview went viral. Within days, Marcus was fielding calls from architects, engineers, and homeowners across the northern states. His construction plans, which he freely shared online, became a blueprint for climate-resilient housing. Universities requested permission to study his design. The thick walls that had been ridiculed became a model for the future. But inside the cabin, the real transformation was quieter and more profound. Gerald and Marcus spent long evenings talking, the older man sharing decades of mountain wisdom while Marcus explained modern engineering principles. They realized they each had knowledge the other needed. Pride had kept them apart. Crisis had brought them together. When the polar vortex finally broke on day 17, stepping outside felt like entering a different world. The temperature had climbed to a balmy 15 degrees. The families gathered on Marcus's porch, breathing in air that no longer burned their lungs. Gerald stood beside Marcus, looking out at his damaged cabin in the distance. "Going to have to rebuild," he said quietly. "Do it right this time." Marcus smiled. "I'll help. We'll use thick walls." Gerald laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Yeah, thick walls. The kind that stand strong when everything else cracks." 2 years later, the mountain community looked dramatically different. Where once stood cabins with standard 6-inch walls, now stood structures built to endure. Gerald's rebuilt home featured 12-inch insulated walls, designed with Marcus's consultation. Tom had started a new contracting business specializing in climate-resilient construction, with Marcus as his partner. Their waiting list stretched 18 months. The change went deeper than architecture. The community that had been fractured by pride and mockery had been forged into something stronger through crisis. Monthly gatherings rotated between homes, where neighbors shared meals and skills. Gerald taught traditional mountain survival techniques. Marcus led workshops on sustainable building. Dorothy, now 92 and still sharp as ever, had become the community's unofficial historian, documenting their transformation. Marcus stood on his porch one October morning, watching the first snow of the season drift down. His cabin, the one that had been ridiculed, now had a small plaque by the door. The local historical society had designated it a landmark, the structure that had saved 11 lives and changed how an entire region thought about preparation and resilience. Sarah from the diner had become a regular visitor, and their friendship had grown into something more. She stood beside him now, her hand in his, watching the snow. "Thinking about that winter?" she asked. "Always," Marcus replied. "Changed everything." Down the road, Gerald's truck pulled up. The older man climbed out, moving a bit slower than he used to but still strong at 70. He carried blueprints under his arm. Got another client, he called out. Family from Bozeman wants to build up here. Want them to learn from the best. Marcus walked down to meet him, and they spread the plans across the hood of the truck. As they discussed wall thickness and insulation values, their easy collaboration spoke to how far they'd come. The mockery was gone, replaced by mutual respect and genuine friendship. That afternoon, a documentary crew arrived. They were filming a piece about climate adaptation in rural America, and Marcus's cabin was their centerpiece. As cameras rolled, the families who'd sheltered there that terrible winter gathered for interviews. He saved our lives, Linda said simply. But more than that, he taught us that wisdom isn't about doing what's always been done. It's about preparing for what might come. I was a fool, Gerald admitted on camera, his voice steady. Pride made me blind. But crisis gave me clarity. And Marcus gave me a second chance. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Marcus looked at the community around him. The thick walls of his cabin stood strong behind him, a testament to preparation, perseverance, and the courage to build differently. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If it touched your heart or taught you something about standing firm in your convictions, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling us about a time when you had to stand alone before others understood your vision. Your story might inspire our next video. Until next time, remember, sometimes the walls that others mock are the ones that stand strongest when the storm comes.